Okay, Connor, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dorothy, indeed, and good afternoon, colleagues. It's nice to see you, and I'll be speaking a little bit in the abstract as well during this session. I'll be speaking to both you as the audience, and also to people who will be listening to this in the future. So please excuse me if I repeat some of the material that you will already know from having worked in previous modules. So the first thing is you're very welcome to this briefing. What I'd like to talk about for the next probably 45 minutes, maybe a little bit less, is the Module B framework that we have been designing and working on for the past year or so within the project. Now, it's different from the Module A in a number of regards. The first and the most important point, I suppose, is that it's a shorter run. It's a 6-week block rather than a 10 to 12-week block, and it is focused on a tight area of interest and concern rather than the more broad introductory type approach that we've taken with the earlier module. So those are two characteristics, if you like, that define it. More importantly, I suppose, I should say it continues as well as changes a number of the directions we've been working with. It continues the focus that we have in relation to developing digital pedagogical skills for future teachers. That's more or less the keynote that marks all of the modules, whether they are short run or whether they are the longer run modules. It is part of the spring pilot. It will run only once in the spring pilot for 6 weeks, starting effectively from next week, the end of next week onwards. There will be 2 short run or 6-week long modules in the spring pilot. The first one is the one I'm talking about today. We have constantly referred to it as Module B. It's perhaps more correct to describe it as the Designing for Learning framework, or the Designing for Learning module framework. And that's what I'd like to speak about for the rest of our session today. Again, those of you who are members of the core team will recognize this slide. Those of you who are listening at a remote or for the first time, or meeting the project for the first time, will probably be less familiar with it. So very briefly, this is part of strand 2 of the work that's been done in relation to the ITELab. The first strand is the knowledge exchange aspect. It connects to the forum particularly, and it involves student voice, industry voice, and the voice of practitioners. The second strand, the co-design content and the pilot strand, is the one that this module connects most directly with. We have had 2 cycles of development for Module A, but this is the first time that we've actually trialed the Module B framework. So it's something of an unknown quantity for us here at UCD, as well as for the project more generally. We've had 2 attempts so far to run A, but this is the first attempt we've had to actually run Module B. So we're looking forward to it, and we hope we will learn quite a bit from it. The third strand then is to do with monitoring. It involves us less rather than it would perhaps in Module A, but there will be an evaluation moment at the end of this module also, which connects to the core questionnaires that we're using to evaluate and to monitor the project more generally. So a little bit more about that later on. Again, for the benefit of those who are joining the project, the philosophy that underpins all of the work we do can be reduced to those 3 headings. We're interested in innovative and pedagogical focused activities. We're interested in activities that are driven by action, by asking the students to engage with materials, with ideas, to do things, to try things out, to make materials, and so on, whether it's lesson plans or short videos or whatever it happens to be. There's an element of the collaborative involved in what we do. It's formally built into the earlier modules, into Module A particularly, less so in Module B, but there is an element of connection also. We will be using the Student Hub for this module as a way of allowing students to share content and materials if they're interested in doing so. The third element, if you like, or the third plank of our philosophy is that everything we do should be flexible and agile. It should connect to both primary and secondary initial teacher education applications, and it should have a European frame and focus. We've done this in Module B rather similarly to how we've done it in other areas of the work of the project. We assume that while it is intended as a 6-week block, not everybody will use all elements of the 6 weeks. That's the flexibility and agility. It is possible to simply dip in and take 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks of the material and the ideas without using the full module framework if colleagues choose to do so for some reason that suits their local interest and their local provision. The element of it being pan-European I think is evident already. We will have at least 2 different European universities working in the Italian area. We'll have at least 2 working also in Portugal, 1 in Ireland, and possibly more, possibly 1 in Northern Ireland also. So that's the frame. It's pan-European. We reach across the European region, and that's part of what we've tried to hardwire or to plan into the module and so on. As with a lot of what we've done in our module frames, the work that has gone into designing Module B is not just something that has been undertaken by one partner at UCD or elsewhere. It connects much, much more broadly to the work of the project generally. So a lot of the content of Module B and indeed C have also come out of the ITELab design workshops that we've been running in partnership with industry and also academic partners over the last 2 years. So there's nothing surprisingly new, perhaps, in what we're trying to do, but it has all come from conversations we've had with university and industry partners in relation to what might make for good content in this particular space to do with designing for learning. So the activity line is fairly straightforward. It's very simple. It's a 6-week block that starts effectively now towards the end of January, runs right the way to the end of February. The official dates are January 21st to January 25th. Now, those are the UCD dates in the sense that we will be running this on Monday evenings. I'm aware that other colleagues will choose to run perhaps Tuesday or Wednesday as suits their local program. That is not a problem. We have always sort of assumed that would be the case. It is not necessary. It's useful, but it's not in any way necessary to be in the space at the same time as colleagues for this particular module. So my hope is that if you are joining for a particular week, that you will focus on the thematic area, the content for that particular week, and that's what we will share our discussion on in the hubs, both the staff hub and also in the student hub. So that's our activity line. It's very straightforward. It's a 6-week block. There will be both primary and secondary partners involved. And again, it will be interesting to see how that works. The framework is divided into 3 units. Again, this is a model that colleagues who have run Module A will recognize to a point. There is no deliberate assessment block in the shorter module. There are 3 teaching and content area blocks. We call them Unit 1, Unit 2, and Unit 3. And they focus on different aspects of designing for learning. Each of them are grouped into 2 or 3 week blocks depending on the module frame that we're actually looking at. So we open with a discussion on the topic of what is learning design. There are 2 or 3 areas in particular we focus on over that 2-week period: the nature and the potential of learning design from a young teacher perspective. A lot of us use learning design already. We understand what's going on in those areas, but it would be nice, we think, to actually share some of that learning with our student teachers. So that's week 1, and part of week 2 particularly we'll look at that. The second element then is the concept of learning scenario thinking. Now, again, people who are core partners will know that a lot of what we do in ITELab is to take, repurpose, redesign slightly, and work with ideas and materials from other projects. The learning scenario thinking is not ours in the sense that we've not invented it. We have borrowed it from the ITELab project, and we are using some of the materials that have come out of ITELab to help us produce the learning scenarios, which are, if you like, quite elaborate lesson plans, but they're more than that. They help the students to structure the learning both in advance of designing the lesson activities and also in terms of following through, in terms of thinking about what they might learn and from doing the activities, as well as using the activities if they have the opportunity in classroom settings. And we're aware that not all students do. So a lot of this is, if you like, practicing and thinking about in a structured and formal way the idea of learning scenarios and learning design. And then finally, within that block, we'll have a look at the concept of 21st century learning and teaching, and how that impacts and how it changes slightly, how we understand it a little bit differently when we think in terms of learning design, as opposed to the more traditional approaches that we've actually taken to some of these things. The second block then addresses directly the challenge of meeting the digital learning design approach. So it looks at the concept of deeper learning, and particularly about how we can use technology, educational technology, to enhance learning experiences, both among our student teachers and also with any future pupils, students that they will be working with. And then the final part of that unit looks at using your design knowledge. And there's a series of suggestions and activities in that week, that second week, in relation to how the design knowledge that has been built up over the first 2 to 3 weeks of the module can actually be utilized. So we hope that will have very practical value for the student participants, and we'll start some very interesting, we hope, conversations among those of us who are developing and designing and working with the content areas. The third unit then looks at problems and projects, and it's concerned with designing better types of learning experiences. So the whole idea really is that we're moving away from the very traditional type of lesson taught front of school, taught front of class type lesson approach, and we're introducing elements of more activity-based and more problem-based ways of working with students in teaching and learning situations. It will be interesting to see how that will work. We've had a lot of conversations around this. We feel it's worth doing, but this is very much a tryout for the first run to see, does it make sense in the real world in which these student teachers, these young student teachers, find themselves as part of their teacher education or teacher formation programs. And we will also then look towards the very, very end of the unit at the power, the affordances, the possibilities of collaborative online projects. So some of this will build on the kind of ideas that we've already explored, perhaps in parts of Framework 1, Module Framework A, but some of it will also be new. We're looking at a specific type of collaborative project, and our hope is that if enough colleagues are interested within the module frame, we might be able to do some activities that involve the student teachers in each of the participant universities in terms of working together in some way. This will not be a live to air session. It will be a, if you like, a virtual collaboration challenge that will be open to all of the student teacher participants, and we hope that it'll introduce an element of surprise, if nothing else, into the work that we're actually doing. And we think that it will connect very well with the rest of the material in the module and sort of bring it all together in a very practical application. That's the intention in relation to the run out at UCD in particular. Now, very much the idea of the typical session is still there. Our assumption at UCD is that it's a 2-hour block that people work within. I'm aware that's not necessarily true for all situations and settings, but it's the best we can actually do in the sense of making the assumption that at least an hour and a half or 2 hours will be available to the groups and the student groups working in the various settings. Ideally 2 hours, but you can work within an hour and a half. And again, colleagues who've been involved in the project will recognize the format that we have here: the startup, followed by the development, followed by the consolidation, followed by follow out. That is more or less voluntary. It can be extension work outside the classroom. It can be homework, if you like to describe it as such. But that's the general frame that we're typically using within this module scenario, as well as within Module A, and in time within Module C. So nothing too extraordinary there, but a nice structure, we think, and it works reasonably well. When colleagues have kind of given us feedback on it, they have found it useful. The resources to support each stage will be available on the staff hub, and I'll talk a little bit about the staff hub in a few moments. So for example, each stage of each lesson, there will be pointers in the staff hub area that will include the material that is already in our handbook, which I'm now kind of hoping has been circulated, and also some extension material, as we discover it, will be added to the staff hub area under each of the weeks. And we hope that will be useful to colleagues in the various institutions. It would be terrific to get stuff back in as well. So if you are using material under, say, week 2 or week 3 that you think the rest of the project could benefit from seeing or sharing, it'd be excellent to actually have some of that to add to our hub as the module develops. Now, a key feature of this module, as opposed to the other modules, is the use of the learning scenario approach. And as I said, this has been borrowed from ITELab. We have found it a very useful idea. It's a super way of helping young teachers to think about and structure and prepare a block of teaching materials with activities built in that are focused on the students, their students, but particularly connected to the use of the sensible use of technology. So in one sense, it's like preparing something that you mightn't use for a year or two. You might have 5 or 6 of these built up over the course of the module. If it's possible to test them, that's fine. If not, then at least the student teachers will have them when they do go into their placements in a couple of months' time. So there is a direct link there to the template, and it will also obviously be in our resource area for the module when that goes live on Monday afternoon next. That brings me to the resource area. Again, we will be using both of the hubs. The staff hub much more so than the student hub, but I'll explain that now in a moment. The staff hub will have a very specific area that deals with module B. So you can see there's a tab there at the moment which is not yet gone live. That will be the space, if you like, under which we will put up the module B framework and the module B week-to-week suggestions. So if you go in under that tab from, say, Monday morning on, you will find lesson suggestions, activities relating to week 1 and week 2. And the idea is that we will always be at least 1 week, more often 2 weeks ahead when it comes to suggesting ideas for future work in relation to the Module B framework. And that will be updated on a week-to-week basis as we move along. Now, we give a little bit of thought to this also. The original intention behind the Student Hub was to support the Module A activities particularly. But so that's why you see there's this heading on the right nav that says challenge questions. We suspect that it would be useful to have another heading there, which will go live over the weekend, that says lesson scenarios. And what we will do is basically we will put up 1 or 2 examples that are sent to us by participants. So I'm hoping that each of the institutions will encourage the student teachers in their institutions to upload their own lesson scenario work in relation to the topics on a week-to-week basis. Perhaps not every week, and perhaps not every student. But if we got 1 or 2 or perhaps 3 from each of the participants on a week-to-week basis, that would be brilliant, because it would give the students then a chance to see, other ways of thinking about the same materials, and also other ways of thinking about how you can plan and design learning in a very active manner. I honestly don't know if this will work. Students can be very shy about sharing materials. There are concerns about, are my language skills good enough, and so on. I would ask colleagues, please, who are teaching this particular module, to take a deep breath and encourage your students to upload materials under the lesson scenario heading onto the Student Hub, even if they just do it once in the course of the module. What we would like to do then towards the end is acknowledge and reward every student who does so by sending out a small certificate to say, yes, you have actually uploaded material, and give a little pat on the back, if nothing else, to the students who choose to do so. So that's really, I suppose, the way that we'll be working in relation to the two hubs for this module framework. Slightly differently from the way we're working with Module A, but I think in an interesting way that will add value to what we're actually doing. And then basically, just to kind of round it off, I started with a little comment on our philosophy. I've replaced each of those, if you like, now with a comment that shows how the philosophy is connected into and is involved in the actual work that we're doing within the module framework itself. So the innovative and pedagogical focused activities that we're encouraging students to think about and to work towards comes through in the UCD context, because we will be doing an assessment on this, in the challenge to produce a portfolio of learning scenarios. Effectively, it's a 6-week block. We're going to ask our students to produce 4 learning scenarios over the course of 6 weeks, and to present those as their, if you like, evidence that they have completed the module. The idea of being activity driven, collaborative, and connected. We're going to push the idea of designing, authoring, and sharing at the local level at the very least. So each UCD student will be involved in designing, authoring, and sharing resources among the rest of the group in the UCD setting. Some of that will make its way up into the Learning Hub, the Student Learning Hub, and we would hope very sincerely that that can be replicated, or something similar can happen in each of the other institutions. That we, encourage students, if they do nothing else, to just at least share these materials with each other at the local level, and then ideally put up 1 or 2 of the ones they're happiest with into the shared space on the Student Hub. And then finally, the idea that it is localized, teaching relevant, and has a technology enhanced learning focus is part and parcel of what we will be looking for within our learning scenario portfolio. The European interest, again, that will come through in the UCD situation. We're going to encourage topics that have a European focus in at least 2 of the weeks that we're working on the module. The rest of the European connection then is, we hope, to be found in the shared space, where students from various European partners and associate partners will share with each other the content that they have been working on as part of the module. That really is all I can say in terms of an introduction. I'm very open to questions, to comments, to observations at this particular point. So thank you for your patience, colleagues who are present in the room. It's nice to see a number have managed to join us. And as I say, speaking to those who will see this in a recorded version, it's equally nice to speak to you. And I hope that you will have found what we've covered in this block, this presentation, useful also. Dorothy, I'm happy to hand back to you at this stage.
Okay.
If you wanted to.
Thank you, Connor. We'll take some questions now, and I would like to just kick off, and just a couple of questions from my side, and then please, Alessia or Anna or Ellie Marie, if you've got some questions your side, please chip in. My first question is around, so this is very much when UCD is running Module B, and so what you're talking about is the live time, if you like, of when you're running it live within UCD. Other of the universities, if they're wanting to run Module B, then there's, the flexibility to run it when they want or part when they want. It's just you won't be running it live in the hub. I just wonder if you could just explain that a little bit more so people are absolutely clear. The materials are there. It's just if they want to co-align with you, that's when you're running it. So maybe just a comment.
Exactly, Dorothy. That's actually, and again, thank you for pointing to that. That is certainly the intention. We will be running for the 6 weeks beginning now, but there is absolutely no reason why you could not start this module at any particular point within the semester run. It's absolutely not a problem. The materials will build up week on week under the Module B tab in the, as I should have pointed to it very briefly earlier, in the staff hub. Those who are working on Module B will have a tab here. Now, regardless of whether you start next week or the week after or next month, that's the tab space that will open out into the Module B materials. What you will find there is a more elaborate version of what is currently in the handbook. Now, if people chose to just run with the handbook, that's fine. Everything you need to run the module in basic form is included in the handbook at this stage. It's all structured in such a way that you could dip in, take 1 week, take 2 weeks, or whatever suits. What we are hoping is that people will try several weeks, not just the 1 week, and we are hoping that they will then be in a position to give feedback on the design of the Design for Learning framework when their students are finished. So if that is in 8 weeks or 10 weeks, that's fine. At that point, we would ask them to complete the questionnaire that has been, it's a very short questionnaire that has been currently designed by our colleagues in the core partner team, the University of Würzburg particularly. We will make access to that questionnaire available to the course leaders in each of the institutions that are trying out various elements of Module B. But as Dorothy has said, you don't have to start next week. It could be 4 weeks, 2 weeks, it could be whenever. And on a week-to-week basis, what you see here under the Module B tab will grow. Module B, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, right the way through to the week 6. And then a little block that would allow people to work through into the assessment area, the questionnaire that's there, and so on. And now, I will mention one other point. This is an open space. We are not putting passwords or we're not putting a protected space around this in any way. So it will not be necessary to register to the module on an individual basis as a lecturer or whatever. All you have to do is go to the tab that's there, ITELab.wordpress.com, and it will be there for you to use. So it's not locked, it's publicly available. You will not be able to enter materials too easily, but you'll be able to download and read everything that's actually there. So I think that's important to mention also, Dorothy. And that will make it easier to take down the materials if you wanted to on a week-to-week basis and move them around. Some people might use what we're using in week 3. That might be the week 5 for somebody else, or week 1 for somebody else. It doesn't matter. It's flexible, it's agile, it can be cut, shut, and
thank you, Conor. And the other point I was just wanting to flag, so that these learning scenarios have been tested extensively and shown that they really work with pupils, ultimately the impact on the pupils in the classrooms. And so they have been tested extensively across Europe, and I will have taken a note of myself, because I'll try and find, for example, some of the link to the Italian language learning scenarios, and similarly the Portuguese learning scenarios. and then we could put them in the hub as additional resources, so that if you're using it and you're looking for your own language scenario templates that people have prepared, we can put the links in the hub for you as well, which I think would be really handy.
I think that'd be very, very valuable. The link that I've just dropped into the chat line there is a link to a blank template. So it leads you to a fully downloadable blank template from the ITELab site. There are other ways of finding it, but that I think is probably the quickest way if colleagues wanted to have a look at it and see if it suits their purposes. There is quite a considerable number of lesson plans built up in different languages, and there is no reason why we cannot take, you know, different languages in the hub uploads as well. It doesn't have to be English. There are lots of students on the various institutions who speak far more than English as a first language, or English as a working language. So I'm happy to take examples in other languages up into the hub space just as readily as English, if it is easier for your students to actually do that.
That's grand. Then I was just going to ask if there's any questions from any of you, and if you, I've got one other question, but I'll not hog the limelight. So has anyone got any other questions? That's good. My other was more a comment than a question. So within European SchoolNet, what we'll be doing with partners and universities that have expressed an interest is, yeah, Connor, I'll go down to the next slide.
Okay.
We've already been asking you to look at the module handbooks again that we're circulating, help to select what is matches your local goals, curriculum and assessment, because the assessment is local but matches with what your own local assessment is, and then asking you to tell us your options. These briefings are in support of that, and so the next stage for us is just summarise the briefings, help you with the implementation so that you can tell us your final plan. And then if we find that there's a group of universities that are all teaching, for example, Module B around this time, we will link you together, and so that you may want to link together and create a session for yourselves if you want to do that. As Connor said, he's teaching at this time, but it's very flexible in there. But we will get the information from you for your final plan.
Yeah, I see an observation there, Dorothy, now at this stage. There's one or two comments coming into the chat line. Elena, it's nice to see you, Elena. Hello. Hello to our Vienna contact, as they say. Something just came in there. The module seems interesting. Ellie Marie is saying she'll be using some of the content. It's not possible to be involved in part of the collaborative project. That's fine, Ellie Marie. As I say, we are absolutely happy to see all or any part of the framework being tested out. So even if it's a single week or 2 weeks, it'll be brilliant to get that tried out, and then to see how your students react to that particular content. So when it comes to filling in the questionnaires at the very end, all they would have to do is look at the weeks that they've actually covered realistically. They wouldn't have a massive amount to fill in, other than the piece that relates to the 2 weeks or 3 weeks that you choose to use. So thank you for coming in on that, and we hope it'll be useful to you.
Okay, and if I take the one about from Elena, so the module starts, the MOOC, the student teacher MOOC, the green button up at the top, it starts on the 25th of February. Registration is open. The briefing that I've got, I hope it's not confusing things, but we are planning if it's of interest to people, a pre-MOOC briefing. Now the reason for this is that we've had a number of universities who are putting it into their assessment, We've had confirmation today from one of the Spanish universities who are awarding it the participation of the MOOC as part of their final grades. And so they've been asking for slightly more information. The actual lecturers have been asking for slightly more information so that they can help with the grading side of it. So the idea was to have something similar like this as another briefing session for those universities who are actually going to want to include it in their portfolio and include it in their grading. But that's what that is there. Okay. And then the final slide is these are all the universities we're dealing with at the moment to try and find out what all the plans are, and we will share with you as we, in the next 2 or 3 weeks, finalise with people how they're teaching so that we can collaborate together with you. And I think, Conor, you mentioned right the way at the beginning that this is very much a learning project. It's an innovation knowledge alliance project. And so we very much want your learning from how you're implementing it to build into what we're doing in our recommendations. So thank you. Conor, back to you.
That's terrific, Dorothy. So I just to re-emphasize what you said there, it is a learning curve that we're actually on. This is the first time we have put out the Module B framework materials for testing. We'd be very, very happy to have informal and formal feedback on that. So if you are using some of the materials and you say, okay, I'd like to have a chat with the project team about this, then please just send us an email. Let me know what's of value, what's interesting, and indeed if you have any suggestions as to how it can be improved, they would be particularly welcome, because we will have possibly a chance to try this again in the autumn. Now, at the moment, the plan is to simply run this, not quite on a once-off, but to run it now in this spring pilot. If the opportunity comes up and if we feel it's of value and we can learn more, we may actually offer it again in the autumn run. But for that to be valuable, we have to learn something from the first time out. So anything either formally through the evaluation frame that we'll be putting into place towards the end of the module, or informally to Dorothy, to myself, to any of the participants, we'd be delighted to hear any suggestions for inclusions or improvement or changes to the module as they are taking place. So thank you once again for your time, colleagues. It's nice to see some old familiar faces, and it's nice to see one or two faces that are not quite so familiar in the chat line.
Okay.
So that's really all I have to say, Dorothy. I do please encourage you, colleagues, to have a look at the handbook, which Dorothy has now circulated. Feel free to distribute that as widely as you like in your own networks and in your own circles. We think it's got some good material in there, but like the original version of the Module A framework, there's a bit of work to be done with it still. And we're very open to suggestions for changes, for alternatives, for improvements in relation to the content for those 6 weeks.
Okay, thank you everyone, and I think we'll let everyone off on their weekend. And thank you, as you've said, Conor, to those attending and watching this remotely. We are here to help, so I will circulate the briefing early next week and publish it. And we very much are all looking forward to working with our extended set of universities and partnerships. So look forward to collaborating more over the coming months. Thank you.